Hey, it's May, and May is Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome Awareness Month. The Ehlers-Danlos syndromes, also referred to as EDS for short, are a group of genetic disorders that affect the body's connective tissue, making it more fragile and stretchy. Seeing as connective tissues are literally the glue holding our bodies together, if there's something up with yours, it can cause issues all over, from joint dislocation to chronic pain to organs not functioning the way that they should. I want to take today to share a bit about my experiences with EDS, in hopes of raising awareness about it and showing people who also have it that they're not alone. Past videos I've released about my identities have analyzed them through the lenses of fictional characters, analyzing how their narratives can be used to understand and empathize with people who've had similar experiences. But the only character that I know of who has EDS is Charlotte Weber from Spider-Man. Don't get me wrong, she's great, but there's not a lot of material for me to discuss there. So this video's gonna be mostly me, without the usual fancy editing or emotional music. I've organized this video by topic, so you can jump to the parts that interest you most, or skip any that make you too uncomfortable. I also want to make it clear that I am not a medical professional. I am a college student with a YouTube channel and a diagnosis, talking about my experiences. While I can recount many of the basic facts about EDS, so could anyone else who's done a bit of research. What I want to focus on is sharing anecdotes from my life of how EDS has affected me, since it's one thing to know that there are people out there with a certain condition, but having a specific face you can match with the condition helps you empathize. I do not mean to claim that this is what EDS is like for everyone, but every time that I do get scientific, my sources will be listed on screen for you to research and fact-check further. I also want to make it clear that what has worked for me might not work for everybody. If you're experiencing similar symptoms, you should consult your medical team, not me. At the time of my writing this script, there are 13 categories of Ehlers-Danlos syndromes out there. Some are diagnosed through genetic testing, while others only require a physical exam. But with 13 types out there, getting tested for all of them is a process. I was sent to a specialist for a physical examination, and she started asking me if I could do things that I thought everyone could do. Can you touch your nose with your tongue for me? Can you touch your hands diagonally behind your back? I can do you one better, Doc. I can hold my hands behind my back. Can you press your palms together behind your back? Tug on the skin of your neck for me. Okay, now the skin on the back of your hand. Do your fingers or toes ever turn purple when it's cold? Do you frequently develop sores or ulcers in your mouth? Have you ever been diagnosed with a gastrointestinal issue like acid reflux? There were also things about my body that my friends found odd, but I'd never taken them seriously. Until the doctor went, you have blue sclerae. When I shine the light on your eye like this, I can see that parts of the whites of your eyes are actually tinted blue. It's because of how thin your collagen, the thing that makes your connective tissue so stretchy, is. Now, years ago, I'd been having lunch with my best friend. She was sitting between me and a window that had a lot of light coming through it, and at one point, she perked up and went, "Your eyes are blue." Yeah, you've known me for years and you've only noticed this now? No, like the whites of your eyes are tinted blue. Yeah, right. Hi, my name is Ebony Darkness Dementia Raven Way, and I have icy blue eyes like limpid tears. Even the whites of my eyes are blue. Then, just a few weeks before this appointment, I'd been hanging out with some of our friends, and when I took my shoes off, they went, "Your foot looks dead." Huh? Oh my gosh, she's right, your foot is purple. Oh, it does that sometimes. My hands and arms do too. I think it's a white person thing. My friends looked at one another like,
that doesn't sound right, but I don't know enough about
white people
to dispute it. No, it's right.
It turns out it is not a white person thing. It is cyanosis, and white people find it just as freaky. Cyanosis is a bluish discoloration of the skin that appears when a person has low oxygen levels, so I can't necessarily make it happen for the camera. As you can see, my hands look fine right now because fortunately my oxygen levels are fine. EDS does more than just turn my skin blue, though. It also makes it super stretchy, allowing me to do things like this. On the downside, though, the skin tends to bruise easily and is more fragile. I love swing sets, but whenever I get off of one, I look like I've been beaten up because my thighs will be covered in bruises just from sitting in the seat. I've also started wearing gloves when I go on swings, even if it's the summer, just to keep the skin on my palms from being chafed raw by the chains. Injuries to my skin also take longer to heal for me than they would for the average person. meaning that when I get a scab on my skin that for most would be gone in a week, it can last months on me. One of the first times anyone suspected I might have EDS was when I was 9 and had to get a surgery. The stitches weren't healing as expected, it wasn't scarring the way it should, and stretch marks were appearing all over my shoulder. Developing stretch marks at a young age is a symptom of EDS. By now my stretch marks are pretty faded, but when they first appeared, they were like these purple reddish stripes covering the trunk of my body. My mom told me that stretch marks were a completely normal part of growing up, but then in the locker room or when wearing a tank top, my peers would ask me what they were. If they were a normal part of growing up, then why didn't they also know what these were? Why didn't they have them too? While I found this confusing, my relationship with my stretch marks began as a neutral one. I didn't find them particularly pretty, but I also didn't feel the need to cover them up. Then my dad started commenting on them. I know having some stretch marks is normal, but have you looked at yourself? They're all over you. Isn't there some cream we can use to get them to go away? They aren't very pleasant to look at. They probably wouldn't look as bad as they do if you weren't so obese. Throughout middle and high school, I weighed over 200 pounds, and the people in my life thought that that was the explanation for every one of my health problems. I would get strep throat, and my pediatrician would blame it on my weight. She thought that my chronic pain was caused by the amount I weighed putting too much pressure on my joints, and said that if I really wanted to stop being in pain, then all I needed to do was lose weight, and she wouldn't give me any other medicine until I'd done so. Having this advice come from an actual doctor, in addition to all of the fat-phobic comments I experienced at school and at home, caused me to develop anorexia. But not eating only made things hurt so much worse. People with EDS often report having their doctor dismiss all of their pain as being weight-related. A physician wrote an article for the Washington Post saying that she's taken care of patients who went to their doctors with symptoms that warranted a standard workup, but instead, they were dismissed and told to lose weight. I'm lucky that the cause of my pain isn't life-threatening. But there are thousands of people out there with curable conditions that end up becoming terminal because the doctors dismissed their symptoms. When I unintentionally lost over 30 pounds during my second year at college, I was baffled, but my doctor completely dismissed my concerns. Mount Sinai, the hospital she worked at, recommends checking in with your doctor if you've lost even 10 pounds in that time frame unintentionally. I'd lost 3 times that. Weight loss at the scale I was experiencing can be caused by cancer, thyroid disorders, AIDS, Parkinson's, celiac. But she didn't test for any of that. She told me this was good because now I was in what's deemed a healthier BMI category. BMI isn't exactly the most accurate of sciences. In fact, a lot of doctors consider it an outright myth that does more harm than good. One of the most common misassumptions a person can make is that correlation equals causation. It doesn't. When it comes to weight and health conditions, yes, there's often correlation, but we need to remember that that's not causation. People will say that weight loss makes your heart stronger. But is it weight loss, or is it the cardio that you're doing to lose weight in the first place, which is strengthening your heart muscles? I could have gotten diagnosed when I was 11 if my pediatrician had bothered to look past the fact that I was fat. But instead, it took until I was 18. That's 7 years of treatments and support that I missed out on during a developmentally crucial time. And guess what? Despite losing weight, my chronic pain is still here and still just as ouch. By this point in the video, I've thrown around the term chronic pain a couple of times, and I want to clarify what that is. Chronic is anything that lasts or keeps occurring over multiple months. So, chronic pain is long-standing pain that persists beyond the usual recovery period or occurs along with a chronic health condition. For some people, their chronic pain is continuous, meaning they feel it every moment of every day. But for people like me, its intensity varies. There are some days where I feel fine, some where I feel a bit achy, and then some where everything hurts so bad that I can't help but cry. The amount of pain I'm in can be affected by factors like change in barometric pressure, how much sleep I've been getting, and what sort of physical activities I've been doing. But there's no exact formula I can use to predict it. Sometimes my body just hurts, and there's nothing I can do. In middle school, when I started telling adults how badly my body was hurting, most of them wrote it off as growing pains. But my mom was concerned by how frequently and intensely it seemed to be affecting me. As someone who experiences chronic pain herself, albeit due to a different condition, she wanted me to see a specialist. The specialist's grand diagnosis was, "Kids these days spend too much time on their dang phones, that's why your back hurts." At least he referred me to a physical therapy clinic. But whenever I mentioned that I went to physical therapy, others just couldn't comprehend it. They thought that people my age only did that if they'd been injured. Where was my broken foot? I'd explain that I have chronic pain, but whenever I said this to adults, they'd go, "You're too young for that. Just wait until you're my age." There are sometimes days where my chronic pain is so bad that I can't sit up, let alone leave my bed. But I can't do anything in it either. It feels like there are dumbbells tied to every limb of my body. Even if I could move, I'm in too much pain to process anything else. A couple of months ago, I was experiencing a relatively average episode and started complaining to my best friend about it. I expected some sympathy, sure, but I was completely caught off guard by just how concerned she was. Yeah, it was too painful for me to sit at the computer, but I could still use my phone to work from bed, so why was she so horrified? Then I realized this was the first time I'd ever described my chronic pain to her in greater detail than, "My body aches and I'm tired." The symptoms that I show up to work and class with multiple times a month would be enough to get most people to call in sick. But if I did that every time I experienced them, I'd be out of the job. Speaking of the job, publicly discussing one's chronic illness is risky because it can affect whether or not people are willing to hire you. Most companies don't want to hire someone they know will actually need to use their sick days. In their eyes, that's not an employee, that's a liability. These companies think that hiring an able-bodied person would produce more profit, and at the end of the day, that's their priority. This is part of why roughly half of disabled people don't tell anyone at their workplace that they are disabled, and that's just for those of us who have jobs. A 2013 study of over 100 people with EDS found that only a third of us even are employed. I am extremely lucky to have a boss who is also physically disabled and very willing to accommodate me, but that's not the norm. That's because I work for an organization that intentionally hires disabled people to give us the opportunities that most workplaces wouldn't. Whenever I have a job interview, I have to seriously consider whether disclosing that I am disabled or showing up with mobility aids will cause them not to hire me when they otherwise would have. But that's illegal in the US, some of you might cry, and you're right. But that doesn't keep it from happening. Ableism has been the leading offender in workplace discrimination lawsuits for years, sometimes even making up 2/3 of cases. Yet more than half of ableism-based lawsuits are dismissed due to a lack of what is called direct evidence. To have direct evidence, you need a statement from the defendant that explicitly says their choice was influenced by the petitioner's disability. This means that people can still decide not to hire someone due to their disability, so long as they don't get caught admitting that was their reasoning. All they need to do to cover their tracks is blame their decision on something about the petitioner that isn't protected by law. These employers, just like the rest of society, make assumptions about us the moment they realize we are disabled. As a multi-disabled person, a term that refers to people who have diagnoses from multiple categories of disability, people often make assumptions about which of my symptoms are caused by which of my disabilities, and their attitude will shift depending on which one they think is the cause. For example, I often walk with a cane, which is due to how my autism impairs my balance. But people don't like that explanation. They aren't used to thinking of autism as a disability that affects you physically. However, if I mention that I experience chronic pain due to my EDS, these same people will nod contentedly, even though using my cane can actually aggravate my chronic pain due to the pressure it puts on my shoulder. I also have a service dog, which many people assume must be there to assist with my physical disabilities. But nope, most of her tasks are in response to psychological symptoms. For the entirety of high school, I was excused from PE, and it wasn't because my EDS made me too weak to participate, but because as an autistic person, being in gym where there were all these noises and physical sensations was way too overstimulating. Despite being openly autistic, others struggled to comprehend why that should excuse me from a class whose activities I seemed physically capable of participating in. Once people realize that I'm physically disabled, especially if they've seen me with my cane, they start to treat me differently than they did when they had assumed I was able-bodied. They start to doubt my ability to perform any physical task and no longer trust me to be an accurate judge of what I can handle. The public often assume that physically disabled people are a weak and fragile population, with a few exceptions that get to become Paralympic competitors. But this overlooks those of us who fall in the middle. When I mention that I do physical therapy twice a week, I'm usually met with pity. But if I rephrase this to say I work out twice a week, suddenly I'm met with admiration. These activities consist of the same exercises, but as soon as you link them to disabled people, any respect associated with them vanishes. I can't tell you how many times the people around me have seemed shocked when I set aside my cane and jump on a treadmill. Sure, there are days where my chronic pain and fatigue prevent me from being able to do this, but what I don't think non-disabled people get is that our levels of fatigue and pain can vary day by day. It's the same with my balance, even if that's caused by my autism. There are some days where I don't need my cane and can put it away, but that doesn't mean I'll never need it again, or that the disability causing it has gone away. My cane is like a jacket. Whether or not I take it with me will depend on the day's conditions. Yet, people are often surprised to see that I can walk without it. I've seen them looking at me, waiting for me to trip or stumble and prove to them that I do need it. But my disability isn't about them. I'm making this video because I want people to know the information within it, not to satisfy others who think that my visible existence as a disabled person entitles them to it. Thanks to social media, voices that have historically been suppressed are now more widely available than ever. This has led many individuals to elect to become educators about their identities. Thing is, there are some people who, when they're accustomed to only interacting with a certain group in the context of being educated about that group, will start to assume that all members of that group are willing to be their educator. I get bombarded with a lot of uncomfortable and unsolicited questions about my disabilities. And the thing is, the people asking them don't seem to realize just how hurtful they're being. I don't think healthy people realize how sensitive of a topic health can be for those of us whose healths are poor. At least once every semester since starting college, I've had some curious Christopher I don't even know approach me in the dining hall with an incredibly invasive question, only to act shocked or even offended. When I say, I'm not going to answer that, I'm just trying to eat my oatmeal. This is not a Q&A session. If a disabled person wants to share information such as their diagnoses and health history on their own accord, then power to us. I've literally done some of that here. But it's completely inappropriate for others to request that information. So this is my reminder to you all that if you do meet someone with EDS after watching this video, please don't ask them to show you how stretchy their skin is or if they have any prolapsed organs. Wait, I haven't mentioned the prolapsed organs. But that's the best part. When I took health education, I quickly noticed that my anatomy did not line up with what I was being shown in the textbook. So, here is what a typical uterine reproductive system looks like. Typically, the uterus is held in place by connective tissue. But if you remember, my connective tissue is kinda stretchy, meaning that if my uterus decides to leave the house and go out on a big adventure, it's on a rather loose leash. This is an example of a prolapsed organ, which refers to when part of the body goes somewhere it does not belong. Having a prolapsed uterus as a teenager who had never been pregnant is extremely unusual, so my gynecologist suspected I might have EDS and sent me out on this diagnosis journey. First, though, she made me get an ultrasound, just to ensure that the cause of the prolapse wasn't a tumor physically pushing the uterus down. So I made an ultrasound appointment, and the nurse started asking the standard questions. When's your birthday? August? Are you allergic to anything? Garlic, so please don't put any down there. Are you sexually active? Nope. Have you ever been sexually active? Well, I mean, not in the way I think you're referring to. We can't do an ultrasound then. What? Your gynecologist requested a vaginal ultrasound. We're not allowed to give those to virgins. Your gynecologist should have ordered an external one instead. We're gonna have to reschedule. Hey, so it turns out that in tons of countries around the world, you can legally be denied a transvaginal ultrasound, even if you consent to it, simply because you've never had penetrative sex. Again, I am lucky that my condition isn't lethal, but I know tons of people with uterine issues that could have been fatal if they hadn't been cured when they were. I went back for an external ultrasound. They had me lie down, put the wand on my abdomen, and I remember going,
The uterus is located a lot lower than I thought it would be.
Yes, that's why you're here. Well, on the bright side, they didn't find any growths. Because of the fat phobia I'd experienced with my previous pediatrician, we switched to a new one. During our first meeting, when I was summarizing for her this whole process of being diagnosed and the symptoms behind it, she had an interesting reaction to the fact that my uterus was prolapsed. Well, don't you want to fix that? There are surgeries we can use to put it in place and make sure it stays there. Well, my gynecologist said that wouldn't be necessary. I've incorporated exercises to strengthen that area into my physical therapy, and she said it didn't pose any other threats to my health. Well, yes, but don't you want to have sex? That's not something I'm currently pursuing. Well, maybe not right now, but you are going to want to. Well, that's rather presumptive. Look, it's probably better to get the surgery done now while you aren't interested, so that by the time that you are, you can jump right in and get to it. Wait. Let me get this straight. You want me to get a surgery, something I have a history of not healing correctly from, one that on average costs around $9,000, not because I have an actual health problem that poses a threat to my safety, but because currently a penis could not fit in my vagina, something I'm not interested in having happen, and you think that's a problem that needs to be remedied? Yes. No. I'm fortunate that I have the chutzpah to look a doctor in the eyes and tell them no, but so many of us don't. Doctors are imposing figures, especially when there's a further power imbalance at play due to race, ability, or age. I know plenty of other people who would have bent to the pressure in my shoes, resulting in weeks of painful recovery time and thousands of dollars out of the bank for what would have been an ultimately unnecessary surgery. Surgeries to facilitate phallic penetration are constantly done on minors without their consent, especially intersex ones. These surgeries aren't pressing, and they're just as effective when done in adulthood upon a patient who can consent as they are when done on a 1-year-old who cannot. Yes, 1-year-old. That's not me exaggerating. Sometimes these surgeries are done on newborns if they're born intersex. Supposedly, these surgeries intend to offer individuals the option of vaginal penetration, but with many of them, insertion of a dilator is a required part of the recovery process. Many survivors of these forced operations have found the experience so traumatizing that they can't enjoyably engage in the very activities that they were supposed to facilitate. If I had undergone the surgery that my pediatrician had recommended, I'm sure I'd be the same, knowing that my ability to participate in such activities hadn't been something that I'd chosen, but that someone else had dictated for me I needed. Remember, you are the head of your medical team. You should get the final say about what is done to your body. I think on some level, I always knew I had EDS. I just didn't know that there was a name for it, or that these different symptoms I'd recognized in myself were linked with one another. Since receiving a diagnosis, I've finally had answers and support for questions that have been bothering me, and have gained a better understanding of myself. I'll admit, at first being told I have a rare connective tissue disorder was a little intimidating. But while we're uncommon from a statistical standpoint, folks with EDS aren't as scarce as you might think. You might even know some, or at least of us. Celebrities such as Halsey and Jamila Jamil have EDS diagnoses, along with fellow YouTuber Jessica Kalgren-Fozard. It was actually through the latter that I first heard about EDS, although at the time I didn't realize that I had it. Much of the EDS community has claimed the zebra as a mascot. I thought that this was because the stripes look like stretch marks, but apparently it's because doctors have a saying that goes, "When you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras." This is supposed to encourage doctors to try explaining symptoms through more common causes first, rather than jumping to diagnose a rarer disease. Well, in the case of folks with EDS, we have that rare disease. We are the zebras. Since coming to college, I've been able to connect with folks who share my diagnosis through a chronic illness support group, and once on complete accident during a Jewish student union meeting, where I mentioned that I had EDS and immediately 3 other people swiveled around like, "Bro, you too?" It turns out that while in general, 1 out of every 1,423 people have EDS, that number is more like 1 in every 164 people for Ashkenazi Jews. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I've linked some sites where you can learn more about EDS in the description, along with my Patreon, which subscribing to gets you access to behind-the-scenes content, such as director's commentaries and sneak peeks of upcoming projects. Thank you once again, and may you all be well.